Brenda grew up in the state of Illinois in the central region of the United States, in a small town called Rockford. Her parents were farmers and had a small plot where they grow corn. Life in the countryside was simple, but there was no shortage of love in the family. Brenda was the youngest of three sisters and was always the most dedicated to her studies and farm work. At the age of 18, Brenda decided to pursue her calling to care for people and enrolled in the nursing school at the University of Illinois. It was a difficult decision to leave her family and life in the countryside, but Brenda was determined to pursue her dreams in the big city. During university, Brenda always stood out for her dedication and empathy towards patients. It was during this time that she met Edward at a college party. Edward was studying business administration and was a successful student, always surrounded by friends and admired by everyone. Brenda was captivated by Edward's charisma and friendliness, and they soon started dating. On their dating days, when the lights of the city of Chicago mirrored on the waters of Lake Michigan, and they sat together observing the silhouettes of skyscrapers under the starlight, Edward would always confide his fears and dreams to Brenda. One of those nights, he expressed a particular fear that caught her by surprise. "Brenda," he began, his voice muffled by the gentle sound of waves breaking on the lake shore. "I need to tell you something important." Brenda looked at him, Edward's gray-blue eyes reflecting the seriousness in his expression. "Of course, Edward, you can tell me anything," she replied, holding his hands firmly. Edward took a deep breath, gathering the courage to express his deepest feelings. I don't want to be a father. I don't think I'm cut out for it, for the responsibility of raising a life. I don't want to disappoint you, but I think it would be unfair to you if I didn't tell you this now." Those words caught Brenda off guard. She had always imagined that one day she would have children, but she had never deeply thought about the matter. The decision seemed so distant, so irrelevant to the moments in their lives. For a moment, she found herself torn between the man she loved and a hypothetical family she had never really considered. "Brenda, are you okay?" Edward's voice brought Brenda back to reality. She looked at him, his eyes filled with concern and a hint of fear of losing her, fear of what that confession could mean for their future. She squeezed his hand, trying to give him some comfort. "Edward," she began, choosing her words carefully. I don't know if I want to be a mother. I have always imagined that I could have children, but I've never thought much about it. If you don't want to be a father, I can understand that, and I think I can agree that we won't have children." Edward looked at her, surprised by her response but clearly relieved. They embraced each other, promising each other that the decision they had made that night would not affect the love they shared. And for many years, that promise held true, until the news of Brenda's pregnancy changed everything. Edward landed a job at a large commercial company after graduation, while Brenda started working as a nurse at the Chicago General Hospital. They got married and moved into a cozy apartment in the city. The tranquil routine of the couple, Edward and Brenda, changed drastically on a gray autumn afternoon in Chicago. Edward, always punctual and dedicated as a sales manager, was returning from work on a Friday, thinking about how he would spend the weekend with Brenda. The radio played his favorite Beatles song, "Here Comes the Sun," a subtle irony considering the overcast sky and wet asphalt. Suddenly, a black car emerged from the wrong lane at high speeds, colliding with Edward's vehicle, causing it to spin on the road. The sound of the impact, twisted metal, and shattering glass seemed to echo in his mind as the seat belt kept him restrained, preventing an even more tragic outcome. Through flashes of red and blue lights dancing in the rain and the chaos around, Edward was extracted from the wreckage and rushed to the nearest hospital. That day, which had started so ordinarily, turned into a nightmare that would mark his life forever. In the days that followed, doctors gave Edward the diagnosis he feared, a complex fracture in his femur that affected the mobility of his right leg. He would need to wear an immobilizing boot, use crutches, and undergo months, perhaps years, of physical therapy to regain the ability to walk unassisted. However, the hardest blow was hearing that his career as a sales manager, that career he valued so much, was no longer viable. He could no longer travel, visit clients, or endure the exhausting routine of an office. Brenda, always Edward's anchor, took on the role of breadwinner. She increased her hours at the hospital, dedicating herself to long and exhausting shifts, while Edward struggled to accept his new reality that now relied on government subsidies. The walls of their home, once filled with laughter and plans for the future, now seemed to confine him in his own bitterness and frustration. The deterioration of the couple's relationship became evident, measured by awkward silences and avoided conversations. Edward, once a vibrant man full of dreams, now resisted any mention from Brenda about the possibility of having children. For Edward, the idea of being a father seemed even more distant now that he found himself in a dependent condition. The bitterness of his incapacity became a wall between them, an increasingly significant obstacle in their relationship. One spring morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains of Brenda and Edward's home, illuminating a simple yet powerful object that had the potential to change everything: a positive pregnancy test. Brenda, with trembling hands and racing heart, stared at the two pink lines, confirmation of what she had suspected but still felt so surreal. Despite the couple's meticulous precautions, life, in its wonderful and sometimes frightening unpredictably, had charted a new course for them. Brenda was pregnant. The mix of emotions that overwhelmed her was overwhelming. She felt scared, apprehensive, but also filled with a strange hope and a whisper of joy. This discovery could not have come at a more delicate moment. The relationship between Brenda and Edward was worn out. Their conversations had become mere whispers of their former companionship. Edward, fighting the bitterness of his condition, grew increasingly cold and distant. However, Brenda, even knowing that the news would be gut punch to Edward, couldn't help but feel a glimmer of excitement at the thought of the little life growing inside her. She wondered what motherhood would be like, how it would feel to experience the gentle touch of a tiny baby, to hear their laughter, to witness their first steps. At the same time, she feared Edward's reaction. The prospect of telling him about the pregnancy was terrifying. She had no idea how Edward, with his growing coldness and apathy, would react to the news. So, as the sun continued to bathe the room in golden lights and the pregnancy test remained in Brenda's hands, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel it all: the fear, the hope, the anxiety, and the joy. She was pregnant, and no matter how complicated things became, she knew she would do everything possible to protect and love the little being growing inside her. On a magnificent sunny afternoon, the beauty of Brenda and Edward's garden seemed more intense. The blooming flowers added a special color to the surroundings, and a gentle breeze blew, bringing the freshness of spring. They sat on the porch, shaded by a flowering vine, enjoying an afternoon coffee served in their favorite porcelain cups. The rich, bittersweet aroma of coffee mixed with the delicate scent of flowers, creating a cozy and peaceful atmosphere. The conversation flowed smoothly, and the topic was the future and their dreams as a couple. Brenda, her fingers nervously intertwined around the coffee cup, a shy and uncertain smile adorning her face, decided to broach a delicate subject, a topic that had been avoided until then. She introduced the idea of having children, her voice filled with care and hesitation. Edward, who had been relaxed until then, his face softened by the sun's rays filtering through the leaves, stiffened. His expression became serious, almost stern. He placed the coffee cup on the table and stared at Brenda, his eyes revealing an unwavering decision. "Brenda," he said, his voice harsher than usual, "we have already discussed this. You know very well that I have been always firm in my decision not to want to be a father. I think the responsibility is too great and I simply don't feel prepared for it." Brenda, maintaining her composure but clearly shaken, nibbled on her lower lip. She looked at Edward, her eyes shimmering with love and determination, but also with a hint of sadness. "Edward, I understand your fears," she said, her voice soft and filled with emotion. "But have you ever stopped to think that together we could face these challenges, that together we could create a family? I love you, Edward, and I believe we would be good parents." Edward, however, feeling increasingly cornered and frustrated, quickly countered Brenda. His voice was harsher than before, filled with disdain. "Brenda, we have been through this before, and my opinion hasn't changed. I don't want to have children, and you know that very well. And there's something else," he continued, his voice filled with disdain. "You are not young anymore, Brenda. It is time to stop fantasizing. Your time has passed. You should focus on taking better care of yourself and taking care of me. You go around with messy hair, without getting yourself ready, and the house is always a mess." The arguments between the two quickly escalated, with Edward raising his voice and blaming Brenda for everything that was going wrong in their lives. Brenda, however, stood her ground, retorting that he remained inactive, imposing demands without contributing to the situation. He threw the wedding vow in sickness and in health in her face, accusing her of neglecting him in his moments of vulnerability. He claimed that instead of thinking about having children, she should be more concerned about taking care of him. The night, which began peacefully, unfolded into a whirlwind of accusations and resentments, leaving the air thick with harsh words and unresolved feelings. The following days were marked by a cloak of tension that seemed to hang heavily over Brenda. A deep sadness began to settle in her heart, not only because of the news of the pregnancy that she had yet to reveal to her husband, but also due to growing suspicion that took hold of her thoughts. The seed of doubt was planted, nurtured by substantial signs and changes in Edward's behavior that she could no longer ignore. She started noticing a strange pattern in the calls Edward received. Some took place late at night, others at the break of dawn, always with Edward speaking in a cautious and distant tone, away from Brenda's earshot. Even in the depths of the night, when the silence was only interrupted by the gentle hum of crickets outside, she could see the glow of Edward's cell phone in the dim light as he typed messages that he never shared with her. But it was a package accidentally found in a hidden corner of Edward's closet that fueled her suspicions to the point of becoming a painful certainty. Inside the package was delicate lingerie, still with the tag on, a piece Brenda had never seen before and certainly did not belong to her. That discovery made her heart contract with a mix of sadness and anger, casting an even heavier shadow over the existing issues in their marriage. All of this accumulated day after day, feeding the melancholy that now resided with Brenda. Her face, once filled with energy and determination, now carried an expression of constant worry and weariness. The joy that once illuminated her eyes seemed to have dissipated, replaced by a silent and resigned sadness. Edward's birthday was on the horizon, and despite the whirlwinds of emotions that plagued Brenda, distrust, resentment, fear, she decided to uphold the tradition of celebrating her husband's special day. Thus, although her heart was heavy, she made her way to a local cake shop she had always loved, known for its cozy atmosphere and delicious cakes. The sweet scent of vanilla and chocolate filled the air as Brenda entered the shop, but the comforting smell couldn't diminish the sadness reflected in her eyes. She was greeted by Nicholas, a salesman with kind eyes and an easy smile, who immediately noticed the melancholy Brenda carried. Nicholas approached with a friendly expression. "May I help you choose the perfect cake?" he asked. Smiling invitingly, Brenda hesitated for a moment, forced a smile, and replied, "Yes, please. It is for my husband's birthday." As they perused the displays filled with mouth-watering cakes, Nicholas sensed the sadness the woman before him was trying to conceal. His empathic nature prompted him to go beyond his role as a salesman. "I could be mistaken," Nicholas said, "but it seems like you could use a little joy today." He paused, looking at her with kindness before continuing. "I think this chocolate cake with a Ganesh filling would be perfect. It has a flavor that brings a smile to anyone's face, and you deserve a smile." Though Brenda maintained her calm facade, the understanding and comfort Nicholas offered were a balm to her wounded soul. His gentle words, the well-intentioned joke about the power of chocolates, managed to elicit a shy smile from her, the first genuine one she had given in a long time. On an exhausting afternoon following a particularly grilling shift at the hospital, Brenda felt that it was the time to confront her fears and insecurities. The weight of uncertainty seemed to be growing heavier, and the silence of her own consciousness became deafening. With her heart pounding in her chest and her hands cold and trembling like a leaf in the winds, she picked up her phone and dialed Edward's familiar number. "Edward," she began, "my shift at the hospital is going to extend into the evening. We have an emergency and I need to stay. Don't wait up for me." On the other end of the line, Edward responded with a tone of indifference that Brenda had come to recognize. "Okay, Brenda, take care. See you tomorrow." She hung up the phone, leaving an empty silence around her. Then Brenda drove her car to a discreet spot on the corner of their streets, where she could observe their house without being noticed. As night fell and the streets became a tangle of shadows, Brenda saw something that made her heart stop. Edward, her Edward, who had been bedridden and struggling with mobility since the accident, was leaving the house. And most shocking of all, he was walking without crutches, without limping, without an immobilizing boot, with an ease she hadn't seen in years. He stopped on the sidewalk, signaled, and the ride-share car pulled up beside him. With one last glance at the house, Edward got into the vehicle, which quickly drove away, leaving Brenda alone with her confirmed suspicions and an overwhelming emptiness in her heart. Brenda's heart hammered against her chest like a wild drum, each beat echoing her worst fears. Determined, she started the engine of her car and began to follow Edward's vehicle at a safe distance. The air inside the car felt dense, with each second seeming to stretch into eternity as she drove. The ride-share car, Edward, was stopped in front of an upscale restaurant in Lincoln Park, a place that shimmered with soft lights and a distant whisper of laughter and conversation. It was a place she recognized, a place that had celebrated anniversaries before, and it only heightened the agony she felt. She watched as Edward stepped out of the car with the same ease as before, his posture upright and confident. But what truly made her stomach churn was the female figure emerging from the shadows to meet Edward's. A woman with blondie hair that glowed under the restaurant lights, elegantly dressed. The sight of that beautiful and unfamiliar woman meeting Edward's made a knot form in her throat. Their greetings was more than friendly, a passionate kiss filled with a kind of intimacy that made Brenda feel like an intruder. The sight was like a punch to the guts, making the ground feel like it was crumbling beneath her feet. There she sat in her car, watching her life unravel before her eyes. Fury filled every fiber on Brenda's being, boiling in her blood like scorching lava. She waited, hiding in the silence of the night, until the couple left the restaurant. She discreetly followed them, maintaining a safe distance, until they arrived home. Upon seeing them arrive, Brenda stepped out of her car. Her face flushed a dark red with anger and disgust. Her words pierced the quietness of the lights, quoted with bitter sarcasm. "Happy birthday, Edward." Edward stared at her, his face expressing nothing but surprise and a hint of nervousness. "Brenda, weren't you supposed to work an extra shift at the hospital?" Brenda's voice rose, her words flying like a poisoned arrows. "Edward, how could you do this to me? Betray our trust and still pretend to be sick," she exclaimed, pointing an accusing finger at him. Edward looked at her, a bitter smile forming on his lips. "The house is mine, Brenda. If you don't like it, you can leave. I'm not going anywhere." Desperation and sadness consumed Brenda, and tears streamed down her face. "I paid every installment of this house, while you lied about your condition. Doesn't that count for anything?" she argued, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Unfazed, Edward simply shook his head. "We got married under the partial property regime, and I bought the house before the marriage. It is mine." End of the story. All that scene had unfolded in a storm of chaotic emotions, but Edward's lover was like the eye of the storm, a silent and static presence observing the destruction around her. She was there, yet almost in the background, her wide eyes fixed on the verbal disputes unfolding before her. The shock written on her face mirrored the emotional devastation that was unfolding. Then, like lightning cutting through the darkness, she intervened, breaking her silence with a venomous accusation. "You lied to me too, Edward." Her voice, though shaken, was filled with bitter accusation, a bladed reflection of a painful understanding. She continued, fists clenched in frustration and disappointment. "You said you were a renowned surgeon, and I. There was a pause, and she seemed to swallow hard before finally exhaling the final confession. "I can't believe I was so naive." Her final words hung in the air, an almost inaudible whisper that seemed more directed at her own self-recognition than anyone else present. It was the sound of her castle of illusions crumbling, a silent admission that she too had been a victim of Edward's manipulative game. In an explosion of raw emotions, Edward's lover burst into tears, her sobs echoing in the silence of the conflict. The door closed behind her with a muffled thud, leaving only Brenda and Edward in a room now filled with tension and bitterness. Belle locked eyes, their gaze crossing the space that now stretched between them, a space filled with unspoken words, revealed truths, and shattered trust. The atmosphere was heavy, almost tangible, and seemed imbued with a dense cloud of sorrow and resentment that threatened to suffocate them both. Brenda felt the ground sway beneath her feet, a sense of dizziness washing over her as she tried to absorb the reality of the situation. She was disoriented, as if she had lost her way in a wild storm. That amidst the tempest of emotions, a growing determination took root in her heart. She knew she could no longer stay in that place, in that house that now felt strange and cold. But unlike Edward's, she had something beyond herself to consider. Looking down, she placed her hands over her belly, the physical sign of the secret she had not yet shared. "I have to go, Edward," she said, her voice firm despite the lump in her throat. "And I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for us," she said, her hands still over her belly. With those words, Brenda turned around and walked out of the house, leaving behind the life she knew, but carrying with her a silent promise to fight, not just for herself, but for the little being she carried with him. The next morning, Brenda woke up with a heavy chest of conflicting emotions and a tumultuous mind. Her once peaceful and predictable life seemed to have crumbled overnight. Seeking some comfort and the familiarity of a friendly face, she decided to visit the small cake shop where she had met Nicholas, the attentive salesperson who had shown her so much kindness. The shop door tinkled as Brenda entered, the sound bringing a comforting smile to Nicholas' face. He welcomed her warmly, his eyes revealing genuine concern as he saw Brenda's very face. "Brenda, it is good to see you. So, how was your husband's birthday celebration?" he asked, his gentle voice filled with concern. Brenda felt a stiff escape, heavy as a stone. "Nicholas, it was a disaster," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I found out that Edward was cheating on me, and to make matters worse, he kicked me out of our house. I feel completely devastated." Nicholas' expression changed upon hearing Brenda's words. A mixture of astonishment and compassion flew in his eyes. "Brenda, I can't believe what I'm hearing," he confessed. "Interestingly enough, I'm going through a similar situation. I discovered that my wife, Marissa, was having an affair. I found a secret Instagram with photos of her and her lover." Brenda, curious and somewhat apprehensive, asked to see the photos. Nicholas hesitated for a moment before pulling out his phone and showing her the image she had discovered. Brenda's face went pale as she looked at the screen. The woman in the photo was undoubtedly Marissa, but it was the man beside her that made her heart stop. It was Edward, her husband, with his arm casually wrapped around Marissa's waist. "Nicholas, this is unbelievable. The man in the photo is Edward, my husband," she stammered, her voice low and shocked. "And this is the woman I saw him with last night." Shocked by the unexpected revelation, Brenda and Nicholas were overcome with a mutual understanding, a sense of solidarity. They found themselves united by a web of betrayal and lies that neither of them could have imagined. With a newfound determination, Brenda asked Nicholas to share the incriminating photo, thinking of using it as a key piece in the upcoming legal battle. Taking the lead, Brenda suggested, "Nicholas, we need to do something. We need to confront Edwards and ensure that he doesn't get away with this." Nicholas agreed. "Yes, Brenda, you are absolutely right. Let's work together on this." With a plan in mind, they hired a divorce attorney specializing in such cases and gathered all possible evidence to support their claims. The Instagram photo of Marissa and Edwards became the centerpiece of their collection, but they didn't stop there. They scoured through all messages, emails, and financial records they could find, amassing a substantial amount of evidence of Edward's deceptions and infidelity. Furthermore, Brenda, recalling Edward's disrespect regarding her contribution to the mortgage payments, managed to gather all the receipts and documents proving her regular mortgage installments, attesting to her ownership stake in the house. During this period, Brenda and Nicholas, once strangers and now allies, found strength and determination in their shared pain, in the pursuit of justice. United by their circumstances, they worked tirelessly to ensure that the truth would be revealed and that Edward would face the consequences of his actions. As the legal process unfolded, slow and often frustrating, Brenda and Nicholas find comfort in each other's company. Days turned into weeks, and the two spent hours together, sharing laughter, silence, and stories from their past lives amidst the turmoil. A pure and deep friendship blossomed, unfolding like a late bloom, its beauty enhanced by its unexpected appearance. There were afternoons when Brenda recounted stories of her nursing school days, of long study nights, and the first time she saved a patient's life. In return, Nicholas shared anecdotes from his childhood in a small town, his dreams of becoming a professional musician, and how he ended up selling cakes in the big city. Together, they explored each other's past, understanding the joys, sorrows, and experiences that shaped who they were. Through these encounters, they not only got to know each other better, but also rebuilt themselves. As much as the scars of betrayal were still fresh, they found a sense of understanding, mutual acceptance that was healing. This connection between them grew stronger every day, providing an invaluable source of the adversities they faced. They became each other's rock, weathering the storms of uncertainty and anxieties about the future together. A friendship forged in the fire of adversity promised to be enduring, strong, and unbreakable. In the majestic courtroom, under the imposing gaze of the judge, the truth finally came to light. Edward's cold and calculated lies were exposed, every detail examined under the impetuous scrutiny of justice. The silence that engulfed the room and the verdict was pronounced was almost tangible, and Edward was forced to face the harsh reality of his actions. With an expression of indignation on her face, the judge ruled that the house, once considered a home filled with promises but now tainted by disappointments, belonged to Brenda. After all, it was her hands that kept the roof over their heads, while Edward took advantage of her kindness and generosity. Her sentence resounded through the room. Justice had finally prevailed. Edward, trapped in his own web of deceit and betrayal, found himself with nothing. He had built with lies, and false promises crumbled around him, leaving him with nothing but the consequences of his choices. He was now alone, rejected, and stripped bare, a reflection of the pain and destruction he had caused. Marissa, the mistress who was also a victim of Edward's machinations, experienced her own form of betrayal. She had distanced herself from Edward, shocked and hurt by being used in his manipulative game. With resolute determination, she decided to restart her life away from Edward and Brenda's toxic shadow, seeking refuge in the promise of a future free from deceit and pain. Helpless and defeated, Edward found himself at a critical point in his life. The weight of his choices fell upon him as he saw Brenda radiant and powerful in her advanced pregnancy. The sight of that baby bump, a symbol of a life about to arrive, seemed to awaken in him a sudden desire for fatherhood. With a trace of insincerity behind his words, he decided to seek her out, claiming a change of heart and asking for a chance for them to start over. "Brenda," Edward said, his gaze pleading, his voice trembling. "When I saw you, when I saw her baby, something inside of me changed. I want to be a father. I need you to give me a chance to make things right, to start over." Behind his words, however, there was no genuine desire to be a father or to do the right thing. Edward was only seeking to reconcile the marriage in an attempt to regain everything he had lost in divorce. But Brenda, who had already endured enough pain and betrayal, was not willing to fall into his lies again. She knew her ex-husband's character well and protected herself with newfound shrewdness. "Edward," Brenda retorted, maintaining her composure, "you have already had your chance. I'm not going back to you. And if you want any kind of relationship with our child, the one you rejected so many times, you will have to resolve it through the courts. I don't trust you, and I won't allow our child to be affected by your irresponsibilities." Brenda and Nicholas, thrown together by a tangle of painful circumstances, had found in each other a safe and sincere refuge. The bond they forged first in adversity and then in solidarity slowly began to blossom into something deeper and more beautiful. Over time, their pure friendship connection transformed into a calm and reasoned love, evolving from friends to a couple in love. Despite the challenges posed by Brenda's baby arrival and the turmoil left in their lives by their respective divorces, Brenda and Nicholas remained side by side. They supported and helped each other in rebuilding their lives, facing each new difficulty with resilience and tender devotion to one another. Brenda and Nicholas' shared journey is an ode to a resilience of the human spirit, a testimony to the fact that even in the depths of betrayal and challenges, love and friendship can be found. Those bonds, once formed, can sprout, flourish, and lead to new beginnings, to a more harmonious and joyful life together. They discovered that the path to a happy future and a solid relationship is built on the foundations of honesty, mutual support, and understanding. In the end, they grew stronger not only as individuals but also as a couple, united by a shared experience, learning that the true connection is born from sincerity and mutual respect. Thank you for joining us today on Deep Stories. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video.